We all know that technology can make our lives easier and more productive, but it can also make the world a better place. Next up is my colleague Alice Duffy. She's a legal director in the employment team in the Dublin office, and Sandra Healy. And Sandra is the CEO and founder of a company called Inclusio. And Inclusio is an online platform measuring diversity and inclusion. And during a next 10-minute flash talk, they will show us how tech is helping to solve the big problems and make a positive difference. Please welcome Sandra and Alice.
Well, AI is clearly transforming the world, but the reaction to it is not always positive. We've all seen those dystopian headlines, such as robots claiming citizenship, AI writing the Beatles' last track, and of course, those robot overlords coming to steal all of our jobs. But what people often overlook are the very many positive social impacts these technologies can have. They can improve workplace communications, identify pay disparities and social inequalities. And for that reason, I'm really pleased to be joined on stage by Sandra Healy, whose technology is seeking to bridge that gap. Sandra, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Alice.
Sandra, can you tell us about your vision and your journey to Inclusio?
Yeah, I spent 20 years in the technology industry, and my background is organizational psychology. And I've been involved in diversity and inclusion for about 18 years. And what I realized is that I had no way to evidence the very meaningful work I was doing around DEI, but there was lots of science out there around how you measure it. So back in 2016, I spun the idea for Inclusio into Dublin City University. And essentially, we set out to solve one of the biggest challenges facing global employers today. And that's, how do you measure something that is inherently difficult to measure? So we built a platform. We combined technology, psychology, and artificial intelligence to bring a scientific, evidence-based approach to measuring something that's very difficult to measure, and that's the diversity of our organization. We developed a scientific framework around measuring culture, so one that doesn't exist out there in the world. We measure things like psychological safety, trust, well-being, job supports. And it's quite interesting now that research is starting to show that if you want an innovation and you want innovation in your workforce, you need to have that psychological safety and trust to underpin that and to activate the diversity. So our customers use our data for things like ESG reporting. So we provide 100% of what you'd need in the S. Your gender pay gap sentiment reporting. We have a lot of financial services companies that use our data for reporting into the regulator around culture and the diversity of their workforce.
Well, diversity and inclusion and ESG are certainly corporate buzzwords in recent years. And but many people don't actually realize that the S in ESG stands for social. So it's all about the impact that organizations have on people, so their employees, their customers, and the communities in which a business operates. It's incredibly broad-ranging, but that makes it very difficult to define and measure. And we're really seeing a sharpened focus on the social element in recent years. In part, that's due to emerging EU regulation in this space. But we're also seeing key stakeholders, such as employees, really call upon their business leaders to take action against social inequalities and workplace culture and well-being. I'm sure you see a lot of this in your area of work, Sandra. Why is the social element so important, and why is diversity and inclusion so key?
Yeah, I think, Alice, this is the first year now that the S has been defined. I think the EU earlier this year now have defined that social taxonomy. And I think the way they've described it is the E is very well defined and the G is very well defined, but we've never really had any guidance around the S and what should be included in the S. And when they've published on the social taxonomy, diversity and inclusion is part of that. And really that's about ethically and sustainably running our businesses. So it's in some respects, it is around, and it's being driven by the people in the organization. So as younger generations are coming into our workforces, they expect that we ethically and sustainably run our business, and our businesses do no harm. And we see that all the time. So we help employers get ahead of that by collecting the data and giving them the insights to be able to shift the culture in the organization, but also to be able to report externally and get ahead of CSRD now, which for next year is starting to come our way. So.
Absolutely. But there's clearly genuine concerns around the risk of bias in the deployment of AI systems and machine learning. Yeah. So take, for an example, from the recent redundancies in the technology sector, where one employer sought to use an AI tool in order to select employees at risk of redundancy. Now, unfortunately and inadvertently, the tool selected employees who had taken maternity leave, and that undermined the very purpose and essence of the tool. Do you have any tips for businesses seeking to deploy or build AI in this space?
Yeah, that's a great example you give there, Alice.
Yeah.
And I know we were talking about that in advance. And unfortunately, when that particular organization that we're talking about there, when they realized that there was bias in the machine, which is what we're talking about, they actually didn't take any action, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's a great example of how not to do it, because sometimes you just have to make sure that you test it and it's testable. And if I think about Inclusio, and like we describe what we've built is an ethical AI engine.
Yeah.
And how did we do that? It was when we were designing the algorithms, we made very conscious decisions that we wouldn't code the algorithms to make any decisions that would bias people. So our machine learns itself. It learns about the culture and the ecosystem of the organization from the inputs of the employees and the organization. So it's a slower way to go about building an ethical or building an AI engine, but it just means that the inputs are coming from the people in the ecosystem. We used the Australian government's ethical AI principles because there weren't any other principles out there at the time. Now there are lots of them, so that would be my one piece of advice. Ireland is leading in that space, and you heard Minister Coveney talking about some of the guidelines that we've developed around that. When we were looking at the Australian government principles, the overarching principle is do no harm. Okay, so if we start with that as our principle, and then you start to think about, is it transparent? Is it testable? Can we make sure that the decisions that the machine is making is not going to have any adverse effects on any one particular population? And I think we need to take that very seriously as we start to move forward and start to implement AI as part of our day-to-day practices in work. Yeah. And just one final word, if you do test it and it's wrong, or it is having an adverse effect, please, go back and recode the machine.
Well, I think we can clearly be very positive about these technologies and the future they hold. But what's certainly clear is that we need to build it right from the outset. So diverse teams, diverse data, and above all, human oversight. So we aren't repeating the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Thanks, everyone.